Greetings all. A happy Armistice and Veterans Day to all those out there with feeling and connection to that spirit in the world and America. And of course, it very much represents a day of peace and peace made in the world after much strife, and remembering those who laid down their lives. Technically speaking, I should be doing a little more World War I history for Armistice Day, but as it's sort of been kind of morphed into Veterans Day, and we just remember those that, let's say fought for the good things in the world. I wanted to come down and do a video in Colonial Park Cemetery in downtown historic district, Savannah, Georgia, at the grave site of Archibald Bulloch. He was born in South Carolina in 1730. He died in Savannah in 1777, essentially a year after the Declaration of Independence was signed, or within that year. Did not live to see, sadly, the release of the British Empire from Savannah in 1781. So we were still kind of on, dare we say, lockdown from the British Empire when he passed in 1777. But we see the classic urn at his grave with kind of a fluting or an embracing what I would call a canthus leaf there in the bottom, stylized. And of course that represents the container for his ashes. There is also an Ouroboros snake consuming itself. That one is damaged, but we see the full head kind of eating the tail there. And that shows, I think, again, his connection to probably things Freemasonry, but also the cyclicalness of life, the eternalness of life. But when I was 18 and I moved to Savannah to attend the art school, and people ask me, now that I've been a storyteller here for 30 years, what was it about Savannah? What caused you to make the jump? Well, art school and the scholarship. But I was so fascinated by the fact that this cemetery, full of so many patriots, was right in the heart of the city. Like, it represented the heartbeat, and everything flowed out of this place. Like, the blood flow through the city came out of the people that really acted and got energized and sacrificed. I mean, Washington's second in command, Nathaniel Greene, right over there, holy moly. I mean, his body, along with his sons, was removed to a city square, but originally laid to rest here. Over here, Declaration of Independence signer Button Gwinnett. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than Colonial Park, Savannah. Okay, but also, when I was a kid, the history books blankly left out everything tied to the southern quarter of the American Revolutionary War. And here's one of those no faults of the Civil War, but it's another way that we've been divided as a people, which I certainly think at secretive levels was intentional. But in an existential general way, history books for American schools, textbooks for American schools in that system, were initially published out of Boston in 1905, and that's still the case to this very day. So you could say we've grown up, all of us really, with this kind of super New England centrific idea of American history, and things less equilateral to the South. And that's just, we'll just say, history written by the victors, or however you want to label that. But, it's kind of an unconscious and conscious part of the deal. Okay, but my mission in Savannah was to fill in the blanks, to kind of learn more about who these people were and how the city tied in, and the whole thing. But when I was 18 and I was hanging out in Colonial Park, because it was, I see, if you guys look way over there, you'll see a building in the distance, and that's where I lived for the first year. That was the SCAD dorm, Drayton Towers. But I was captivated by the grave of Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's great, I think possibly 4 great-grandfathers back. Might just be 3. You'll have to, fact check that. But Archibald Bulloch was born in South Carolina. He lived in a community briefly in his childhood, not too far up the river from Savannah, called Josephstown, which was kind of a group that had broken away from the founder of Georgia, Oglethorpe. But eventually, Savannah sort of is the claim for the hometown. But there was a phrase on the plaque that was uttered to basically the provincial Congress on June 5th, 1776, and I was floored by it because it spoke to me so deeply then as an 18-year-old, and now, let's say, a few decades later. This is no time to talk of moderation. In the present instance, it ceases to be a virtue. And I knew then what that meant, kind of the essence of the fight, that it was time to do this. And by the way, Georgia, the only colony to use the hated stamp of the Stamp Act, and we were dubbed by all the other revolutionary kind of leaning colonies as the foot-dragging loyalists. Archibald Bulloch was definitely not middle-of-the-road guy. When he saw the powers invested with England hemming and hawing about, rocking the boat and blah, 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 and basically at the greater sacrifice of the cause, the subjugation in ways, he basically stood up and said the thing that, I guess he was the one willing to say, this is no time to talk of moderation. The present instant ceases to be a virtue. And bam, Georgia in many ways really enter the heights of the war. The second bloodiest battle of the Revolutionary War was fought here in 1779. The siege of Savannah Battle, all that stuff. But, it's the people that put this on the board knew that was important. That spirits and eyes and hearts like my own would recognize its value, especially at any time in probably our nation's history when there was just not enough fight yet in the spirits of people when there should be one. So I knew that. So I went and got a very expensive, when you were an art student and you had to buy a $20 piece of paper to paint watercolors on. You didn't just kind of throw that paper around lightly, but I did. I cut a big stretch out of that piece of paper. I came over here with some black oil pastels, and I did a rubbing of that very phrase, and still have it to this day. And if I ever got anything tattooed on my body, it would be this very phrase, because I feel so closely connected to it and its meanings. Also, just a final thought on Archibald Bulloch. You're looking at the guy who was invited to sign the Declaration of Independence and basically declined. And let's go ahead and kind of frame that a bit. The Magna Carta was obviously essential. Historians nod to it, talk to it. But, when we are talking about America, and we're also talking about maybe just two documents, not 3 or 4 or 5, but let's just say 2 documents that really rewrote the course of the history of the world in terms of a Western society definition. You are talking about the Bible, and you are talking about the Declaration of Independence. And, these are the 2 documents that changed the history of the world. And obviously, the Declaration of Independence is really seen as almost like a spiritual Bible document for the United States of America. And so very vital to remember and important. He, however, Archibald, thought it was too important to stay here in Georgia to really be that voice that said such a powerful thing. And of course, the president of Georgia, the first president of Georgia, Archibald Bulloch. So he didn't go and sign the Declaration of Independence. He really felt he needed to stay home. And so I think that's fascinating that, we're talking about a man who was as patriotic as any of those names on the document. But here's a guy who just felt there was something more dutiful to be done locally than maybe the vanity of said document. But boy, if he'd only had email or let's say an electronic signature, right? I'm sorry. But yeah, Archibald Bulloch would be like, here's my electronic signature. Go ahead and apply it to the document in whatever way. But gang, I feel this is the kind of video that people need to connect with right now. And I thank you for watching it today. But yes, here's to America, here's to the future spirit of that everlasting, and long live the name of Archibald Bulloch.